You can do that.
Yeah, well, it is like in my, best location of it is the gas station that's down there. That's just about in that's the middle of it. And that medical building, that's where the Victoria paper mill was. And the driveway that went in to both of them, they both used the same driveway, is right opposite the one at the Burks. That their driveway were right opposite. Up where Burks parked their car now, that was 2nd Street. And when you come right across, there was a railroad track. Went through there. They used to go south, and when the station was down by where Goldberg's is now, that was the O&W station. When I went through Fulton.
Amazing how it's changed.
There's some pictures around on that. I think John knows about that. Yeah.
Did you want to tell about any more
Well, the only
guns?
thing I was going to mention about, I know when they were building, after the gunworks was destroyed and they were leveling the ground, I guess they said they bulldozed actually almost thousands of pounds of parts and things are still in the ground right over there when everything was demolished. And I imagine quite a few collectors today would cringe if they knew how many parts were laying there rusting underneath that gas station where you mentioned.
That was one of the problems they had when they started the war work. The old machines had run so long in one place that they couldn't do the precision work required. We tried to make parts for this Arlington 20mm anti-aircraft gun, but they just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, they'd start out 1,000 parts. They'd wind up with about 500 pieces. You know, where were the other 500?
Yeah.
They kept wondering where they were, wondering where they were. One day somebody happened to go down underneath the building. They found it.
And that's where they were.
They throw it down a raffle or something. Yeah.
Hunter also made a fan. Bob, would you explain where they moved that, where that was made?
Well, the Hunter fan was one of the Hunter projects, and that's up where the Osborne paper mill equipment. Now it's a zinc paper mill up in there. I think up.
I believe that's on Burt Street.
And it's on back of McDonald's up there. And that was sold in 1948, I believe, to some outfit in Memphis, and they're still being made today.
Yeah, see, the Hunter fan was a paddle type fan for ceilings, and all of a sudden these are very popular. And I believe it's made in Memphis, Tennessee now. They still have the original patents with it.
They made table fans of various sizes.
They made many different fans.
I have a Hunter table fan, and is it heavy? Wow.
Yeah, it still works probably as well as this, though.
It's like you're picking up half a car.
They also had the, what is Armstrong? They owned that. That was the Hunter sulfite mill.
Yeah, and not to mention the Hunter bikes.
Yeah, and they make bicycles.
Over in the Fulton Historical Society is one of the...
There's two of them.
Two of them.
They got two bicycles over there.
One of them was Clara Wadsworth's. Yeah. That was the other. Well,
I always thought they were just the 500 brothers, but according to the book, the Bofies, there were 6 of them.
There were 6 sons and 1 daughter.
Yeah, 6 of them.
And they all worked in together.
Yeah, and the youngest one died shortly after they started the Hunter Arms. It mentions that in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a wonderful...
That is show them the picture of the center fold there, the engraved gold gun.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book if anybody is a fan of Hunter Arms or Smith guns. And it's L.C. Smith Shotguns by William Brophy. It is the definitive work on Smith guns. And it has everything from the beginning history right to the very end, and some of the finest guns that were ever produced. As I mentioned earlier, Al was wonderful at incorporating various golds into his firearms, 2 or 3 different kinds of gold. And here's an example, for instance, of a gold inlaid Smith gun. And they were the finest, one of the finest firearms ever made in the world. And to this day, here's another fine example. And here's some of their case coloring too. But it was very difficult to get that gold in there and to get it to stay. And here's, for example, of 2 different colored golds, as I was mentioning earlier. There's a red and orange gold, and there's a yellow gold. But Al was such a master at this that he was able to incorporate 4 different colors of gold into his firearms. They were a remarkable gun. The only true weaknesses they seemed to have was, if they can hand me that
Yeah.
again, John,
It was right in the barrel, or not in the barrel, but in the stock.
was in the stack. As wonderful a gun as it was, the true weakness of a Smith gun was in the stack. It was a little too straight through the wrist, and mainly there wasn't much wood left in through here when you were fitting it, which meant that when you fired the weapon, most of the force of the frame came right back in through here. And the majority of the Smith guns you'll find would have hairline cracks or split through here on their guns. And even the famous pair of guns that they ordered for Clark Gable and Carol Lombard, when they were fitting, there was a pair of crown grades, by the way. They weren't extremely high grade. You would assume an actor like Clark Gable might have had deluxes or specialties or monogram grades or some of the A grades, the higher grades, but instead these were working guns. Clark Gable was a great hunter and sportsman, and he wanted these guns to be able to be taken out and hunted with, not just set on a shelf like the one that John Philip Sousa, the gold gun. And when they were manufacturing Clark Gable's gun, they did pick out for a crown grade. It had high grade wood, but it wasn't as high a grade as a deluxe. But they tried to pick out as fancy a piece of wood as they could get for a crown grade, seeing it was for a movie actor. And the original stack, when they were fitting it, had developed a crack right in through here. So they had at the last minute, it was something like 2 or 3 weeks before he demanded to have delivery of the firearm, so they scrapped that fine piece of wood and they had to substitute a lesser quality piece of wood in order to make their delivery date. And of course, Clark Gable never realized it at the time. The Hunter brothers and Smith Guns was particularly proud of their wood that they had for their firearms, and they had people who literally scoured the world to find the finest wood blanks possible. They wanted very tight grained walnut so that it wouldn't crack. And also, the tighter the grain of the wood, the better the checkering would take, but particularly on the higher grade guns, like the deluxes and the kind of gun that Garfield Snyder would checker. That wood was just as tight and hard. It was almost like, it would almost look like ebony. It was that tight of grain. Another weakness of the Smith gun was the stock finish on the lower grade guns. The high grade guns like the Deluxe and things like that, they had 30, 40 coats of hand rubbed oil. And Sam Sherman, before he died, told me how, in the end, how they would put those hand finished coats of oil on a Deluxe gun. How they would use some pumice powder and a little bit of the oil, and they would rub it in and rub it in and rub it in and rub it in for practically hours, and then wipe it down with a burlap rag. And that took, of course, considerable amount of time. But on a gun that took like a Deluxe Smith, which back in 1900 and 1910 and 20s would run as high as $1,200 to $1,500, which was an astronomical price for a firearm in those days. When you stop and figure what was a Model A Ford or a Model T, you know?
700.
Yeah. And it took probably a week or two to hand build a finish alone on a high grade gun. But they could afford to do that on a high grade gun. But on field grade guns, like I mentioned earlier, where they cost $15 back in the early 1900s, they had to come up with a fairly attractive, fairly quick finish, stock finish. And I think it was Al Van Sanford mentioned to me that in the stocking room there, they had a huge 5-gallon jar, or was it you, Bob, that was telling me? And they had their finish on the field grade and an ideal grade, and even this finish right here. What it consisted of is they had boiled linseed oil, shellac, and turpentine. And what they would do is they would put that finish on, and it would dry and they had drying ovens, of course, where they hang them, and they could build up this finish fairly quick. The only trouble with it is, as anybody knows who's familiar with wood finishes, shellac is not a very good finish for anything exposed to moisture. And as long as your gun was kept inside and used on only dry weather, it was very good. But as soon as you took it out and say a duck boat or something like that, the finish would invariably lift. So almost every Smith gun you will see what may have 100% of the blue, bright blue, which was a wonderful blue finish they were able to put on their guns, where they were known.
We didn't cover that, did we?
No, we didn't get into blue. If you want, mention that, Bob.
Yeah, that the gun barrels and the old Smiths, the Hunter Arms built, they had this Frank Cordonier family had the patent on this finish that they put on the barrels. And in the pictures, I think there's one here that shows where they blocked the end of the barrel with wooden plugs. There it is, right there. If you look at the gun barrel standing against the bench, you'll see wooden plugs in them. And that would keep this acid from going down into the gun barrel. And what it was is acetic acid and logwood. In other words, like a black finish to give it the color. And it's nothing more than a rusting process. But it took 4 days to do it. The first day they would put it on, it would just turn red from the metal. They put it in a steam cabinet with some moisture. So it would deliberately rust it. Then the next day, they take that gun barrel out and they run it on a wire wheel. Take all that rust off. And you would have a black surface. Just like if you spill Coca-Cola or something on metal, it'll turn it black. This was basically the same process. They just repeat that. Till you got to the 4th day, you had a finish that was just about indestructible. You could take it out in the weather, and the water would never affect it. You could lay your gun against the fence, and you wouldn't scratch it, because it was part of the metal. And when Marlin came here, they bought that patent, Frank Cordonier. And he stayed and set them up to get them going. But that 4 days, they couldn't wait for it. They had to have their guns right away. But when they shut down, they had so much trouble with the gun barrels bluing that they hired a guy to stay over about a year. And the 5,000 guns they did have upstairs, they stripped them all and put the old Browning on them. They went back to it.
No,
2 years later, they wished they had 5,000 more guns because that's what they needed. It was that dew light on the barrel. And they were told time and time again by the old gunmen that this stuff was no good because they would eat the solder out of the barrels.
Yep, and the barrels would separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the barrels wouldn't separate, but your ribs come
The
loose.
rib would flop, yeah.
Ribs come
Yeah,
loose.
Yeah.
See, Marlin made nothing but solid metal. You could put dew light on it a couple coats, it would stay.
Did we mention when Marlin took over Hunter Arms? And
Well, I don't think we did
No.
mention that. But they came in, it was in the court hands, bankruptcy court. But there was a group around town that wanted the gunworks to stay here. And they tried to raise money to take it over, and they just couldn't get the money.
No.
But Marlin promised that they would stay here, but they just didn't.
Used as a write-off, I
But there was, yeah. But today, there'd have been all kinds of federal money and grants
Yeah,
and this
yeah.
and that and everything else to keep them here.
Yeah.
Because it was about 200 jobs it took out.
Yeah. I heard that same story you did, how they kept the man on for over a year to redo those barrels.
Yeah.
And no matter...
Bobby payment.
Yeah.
You know. But until you had a polish out, to just buff, they have dew light, it just
Yeah.
come right off. I mean, it was like a coat of cheap paint on there.
It's amazing hitting the gun shows that I do throughout the country. You'll see almost every Smith gun you get your hands on, the bluing will be absolutely spectacular. The case coloring, of course, that was a design fault of the case coloring, not a design fault, but I mean an inherent factor of it. If it was